Jaron, welcome to London.
Thank you.
Welcome to Waterstones. When this proof arrived in the post for me, 10 arguments for deleting your social media accounts right now. As the man who looks after social media accounts, this was obviously slightly perturbing. Slightly worrying thing to receive in the post. You obviously have a huge sort of connection with all things tech. You have been involved in this for a long time. I feel like I've been involved in social media for a long time, sort of a decade, but that's nothing compared to the time that you have spent engaged in technology. But you have very strong opinions about social media in particular, 10 arguments which are laid out here on the front of this proof. There are a few that I thought we could pick up and talk about today.
Certainly.
You come up with a great phrase in this book, which is bummer. This is the acronym you have for your machine. This is to describe how social media works, basically, and why it's awful, or why it can feel awful. And the thing that really struck me about that was the trend towards negativity, which I find a very compelling argument. Your experience of that happened very early on in the sort of chat rooms and the messaging of very early forms of that. Is that right?
Yeah, back in the very earliest days of online connection, well before the internet was initiated, there was this remarkable phenomenon that was universally experienced, which is that people who would normally be decent to each other would get into these very strange interactions where people would become cruel, sadistic, they'd gang up on unfortunates, there would be bullying, all these horrible things happened. And this really came as a surprise. It was quite a shock. And at the same time, it wasn't as if people were repelled by it. Instead, they were drawn in more and more. Mm-hmm. Now, the only difference between then and now is that this phenomenon has been harnessed as a commercial product to be sold as part of a means of sneakily modifying the behaviors of the people who are trapped in it. So there's really two different things we could talk about. We could talk about what this mysterious force is that brings out the worst in people, and then we could talk about the commercial project that's evolved to take advantage of it and that has made it ever more entrenched.
So in the book you say that, of course, most people using social media, they can't make any money from it, but what they can get is attention. And of course, attention means likes, retweets, shares of things that you've said, engagement with it. And often by engagement, what we mean is often people disagreeing with what you've said. And often you may find that in order to get that engagement, because you've become slightly addicted to the social media platform, you will say things that are provocative in order to get that engagement. Is that kind of right? And that the trend will always be to favour the negative because that will get the stronger reactions from people rather than the positive.
Well, it's a little more subtle than that.
Okay.
It's not so much that negative reactions are stronger. It's actually that they're faster, they're quicker. Mm-hmm. And so these algorithms are measuring very quickly how people respond. And the goal of the algorithm is to get you more and more engaged. And so whatever the algorithm can detect the most reliably that serves that purpose will get emphasized more and more and more. And it just happens that what we can say are negative emotional reactions rise faster typically than positive ones. If it weren't for that issue of timing, actually positive and negative emotions in people are equally powerful roughly. Mm-hmm. But it just happens that the algorithms pick out these things that respond quickly enough to matter to this very, very fast sampling operation. So for instance, you can become irritated or annoyed or scared or startled very quickly, but then it takes a long time for those things to die down. Mm-hmm. But in contrast, it takes quite a while to build trust, to build affection, and so these things aren't even detected in this rapid measuring scheme.
And the purpose of the algorithm, as you said, is to make money for other people. It's to make money for those tech companies, the ones who are going to make the money, and they do that by scraping all that data, learning all of that stuff about us, about how we behave and interact, and selling that information to advertisers.
Well, it's not exactly that. Let's be clear. The advertisers don't necessarily have access to all the information that's gathered. The way the scheme works is that your data is compared with corresponding data of many other people. Mm-hmm. And then correlations are hypothesized by the algorithms. So other people who might have a similar pattern of in their life in some way, and it just could be any number of things. It could be where you tend to go, or who you tend to know, or the pacing with which you do things, or what kinds of colors you like, or foods, or just, I mean, it's really just anything. The algorithms don't care. And once you've been grouped with a set of people who seem to have some similar set of attributes, then all of your responses are observed after you get different stimuli, which might be an ad with a blue border, or an ad with a red border, or a connection with a certain kind of person or a certain kind of acquaintance. And once there's a correlation where all the people who are kind of like you seem to respond in a certain way, whether it's positively or negatively, anything, to anything, that correlation is then used to feed you more of that stuff in order to drive engagement. And what the advertisers, the people who are the true customers of the system, are paying for varies a bit. In many cases, I call it an existential protection racket, because people are afraid if they're not paying into the system, they'll just disappear from reality. Nobody will know of my brand or what I'm trying to do, or of me, if I'm not paying into companies like Facebook and Google. So they just feel compelled to. So it's not exactly for a result, but it's out of fear, because there's like a monopoly on so much attention. In other cases, people are looking for a particular result, which is to sell something. Or in the most horrific cases, it's bad actors who aren't necessarily paying for ads. They might be just very craftily creating posts instead of paid ads. But these are people like most famously, the Russian information warfare units that have intervened in American elections and in the Brexit vote here and in many other elections around the world.
Let's talk about Brexit. We have to broach it. And indeed the American election. There is this feeling that we are only just beginning to realise how people have been influenced. And you talk about in your book that what we're talking about here is not social media platforms. They are behavioural altering platforms, basically. They're trying to alter your behaviour.
Yeah.
And there is a feeling, I think, that people are beginning to wake up that they may have been duped with fake news, false information, as you say, lots of accounts that aren't real people. They're bots or sort of bad actors, as you say, who are there to influence results. Are we just at the tip of the iceberg? Are people... Do people even begin to realise, sort of the true scale of it?
I think only a very small percentage of people have started to understand the scale of what has been revealed, and there's more and more revealed every day. More was revealed about Russian intervention in Brexit just in the last few days. Now, I want to make an important distinction here. I'm not making the claim that Brexit was a horrible thing and it's the internet's fault.
Yeah.
My concern isn't whether Brexit was the right outcome or not, because I'm not British. That is your question to decide. What I want to point out is that the way that the Brexit vote occurred was one that involved a tremendous spread of negativity and cynicism that was, we have learned, highly directed by an outside influence, in this case, a Russian strategy to disrupt Western democracies. Now, there have been cases in the past where countries decided to separate from an alliance without this kind of rancor, and a nice example is the Velvet Divorce between the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Brexit could have been like that, perhaps. So it's not so much the particular topic or the outcome of the vote, but the nature of the vote that I would like people to focus on. So what happened, for instance, in the election in the United States that led to the Trump presidency was that there was an extremely similar wave of rancor and cynicism and polarization. And the goal was to destabilize the country. There was a tremendous effort by Russian forces to dissuade people who might vote against Trump from voting at all by spreading cynicism and, it doesn't matter, it's all screwed up. And the thing is, it's once again, this isn't about who won the election, but how the election was determined. And in both cases, we do see this intervention. And the thing about this is that if you have a society that's based on the premise that any time people connect with each other or connect with society in any way, that connection is financed by third parties whose goal is to manipulate those people, if that's the fundamental strata, then of course it's an open invitation for abuse because it's fine-tuned for precisely what the Russians have done. Um, so what I hope, and I think it'll take a long time, but I hope that even those who are pro-Trump or pro-Brexit will come to realize that that's an entirely separate issue than this issue of disrupting society. And perhaps it's difficult, but perhaps or hopefully someone who's pro-Brexit will learn that one can be pro-Brexit and still very disturbed by the process.
There is, I think, for you as somebody who has seen the dawn of this technology occurring, as you say, there was great positivity at the beginning in the hope that the ability to communicate with people across vast distances, the ability to bring communities of people together was the goal, and it very quickly soured. Is it fundamentally flawed? Does it literally, I mean, your argument here is that you have to delete your accounts in order to force those companies to create a better platform, and that platform would be more like a subscription model, so that you would pay your money to have a platform, therefore it wouldn't be beholden to advertisers.
Right. Well, first of all, there's unquestionably good stuff in social media. For instance, people with things in common are able to find each other who could not before. People with unusual diseases or unusual interests have an easier time finding each other, and that's marvelous. And what I would like to see is a world in which those good things are available without this manipulation machine, the thing I'm calling the bummer machine running behind the scenes. Now, is that possible? Yes, of course it's possible. What we did in Silicon Valley is we tried to split the difference between two incompatible goals, and we ended up with garbage. So one of the goals is we wanted to celebrate entrepreneurship and master capitalists and hackers and stuff, and this sort of Nietzschean figure of the Steve Jobs who bends the universe and all that. He called it denting the universe, which might be more apt. And then on the other hand, we also had this sort of socialist feeling: everything should be free, nobody should be denied, everything should be open. Those are conflicting goals, and the way to get around that was the advertising model, where they say, well, we'll make it seem free, but actually we'll make money by selling it to the people who want to manipulate those who are using the system. So the obvious way to undo this problem is to just choose one side. We could either say that internet services should be like the public library. It's a public service owned by the public, serving the public without any other agenda. Hard to see how we get from where we are to there, but that might be good. And there's actually one country that says it's going to try it. I don't know how this will go, but Papua New Guinea is going to take that route, they say.
Okay.
Who knows? All right. And then the other route is to make it all capitalist and to say, actually, people should pay for this thing so that the finance comes from those who use it rather than from third parties who are manipulators. And indeed, there's another side of it, which is people should be paid when they contribute valuably to these systems. And just two further observations I want to make, which is that this contest between free but paid for by third-party manipulators versus people paying for what they want. This contest played out in television and movies in the last decade and a half. There was a strong movement from Silicon Valley proclaiming Hollywood and other movie centers are going to be things of the past, and what we'll do is we'll organize bands of volunteers in the way that the Wikipedia does to create movies and television, and that'll be better. Lots of people tried, nothing much came of it. What did was terrible. And then there are other people who said, hey, we can use the internet for direct billing for people who like our TVs and our movies. And an example would be the company Netflix. And there's also HBO and many others. And that seems to have worked out. In fact, it is thought by many that TV got better. It's called peak TV sometimes. So I think we had a fair contest. And maybe that same contest should be played out with things like social media and search. And we might be able to have a peak social media that would really be better and that wouldn't be so mean spirited and that wouldn't have so much fake stuff and wouldn't be such an open invitation to information warfare units that distort elections and distort society, that wouldn't be correlated with teen suicide rates, that wouldn't be correlated with ethnic violence in areas that had become peaceful, and so on. And there's this other side to it, which is if the system goes commercial and you're paid when you contribute something that gets wildly retweeted or whatever it is, that provides an antidote to this other issue that's coming up where Silicon Valley is saying, hey, we're going to make artificial intelligences and robots that'll put all of you out of work. You're all going to have to go on some kind of basic income because you'll all be obsolete. Oh, except we need to keep on getting your data. Google says we're really, the reason we need to steal all your data is because we're an AI company and AI needs a lot of data. That's the fuel for it. So what I'm thinking is this is screwy. On the one hand, you're being told you're going to be made obsolete, but we need your data to make you obsolete. You see so if you just pay people for their data, maybe they don't have to be made obsolete, and then we can have more new creative roles in the information age instead of fewer paid roles. And so that's another reason to be interested in the paid model. But at any rate, this weird fusion that we call the advertising model, where the behaviors of users modified and made into an empire for rent. That's bummer.
That's bummer.
Instead of, that is the thing that's not sustainable. If we can replace it with either a more commercial model or a more public model, I think we can have a more sane society and a happier society.